Farming is in Cornwall's DNA. From the sheep on our windswept moors to dairy cows grazing the lowlands and our beautiful cauliflowers, food production has always been a mainstay of the local economy. But are these peaceful rural scenes actually contributing to climate breakdown? My name is Lisa Guy and this is my climate story. I'm an organic beef farmer and I manage 120 acres in this wild and ancient landscape of West Penwith near Land's End. Like many people, I'm worried about how the food we eat might be contributing to the climate crisis. But I'm equally concerned that farming doesn't become the scapegoat for all our environmental problems.
I'm not convinced that most people do really understand the tremendous climate impacts of meat and dairy.
Cows are not the problem. They're not driving climate change. But the way the propaganda machine works, people are still driving around and flying on holiday to Europe, but they're like, oh, I don't eat beef because it's destroying the atmosphere.
Farms have had to get bigger to survive, but by producing more, we've sort of wrecked the environment to a degree. We're just protecting our bottom line, but unfortunately that bottom line is doing a lot of other harm as well.
We're often seen as an industry that's generating the majority of the problem, but we are the only sector that can provide a climate solution through the act of growing food.
We may be famous for our new potatoes and daffodils in Cornwall, but in this wet and mild climate, there's one thing we grow really well: grass. This means that nearly all of our farmers farm livestock, or crops for those animals to eat. In fact, Cornwall has many more cows and sheep than people, and the southwest produces 40% of all the UK's milk. Official figures show farming is one of the leading sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Cornwall, and unlike other big sectors like housing and transport, the emissions from farming have barely gone down over the last 25 years. Becky Wilson is a woman on a mission to change that. She works for the Farm Carbon Toolkit, which provides training and advice to help farmers reduce their climate impact. While we're all used to hearing about climate change caused by carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels, the greenhouse gas emissions coming from Cornish farms are actually quite a bit more complicated.
For other industries, obviously carbon dioxide is the main issue, but for a farm, only 10% of their greenhouse gas emissions on average will be coming from carbon dioxide, from how much fuel and energy we're using, the diesel that's going into tractors, the electricity. The vast majority will be coming from two other gases. Methane comes out the front end of the cow or the sheep from the process by which ruminant animals turn grass into meat or milk. Our cows and our sheep are always going to produce methane. It's an inherent part of that digestive system.
Methane doesn't last for long in the atmosphere, but while it's there, it has a far stronger greenhouse effect than carbon dioxide, and about half of all methane in the UK comes from livestock. James Dyke is an Earth Systems science expert investigating humans' impact on the entire planet and what this could mean for the future of our species.
The real cause for concern with methane right now is that it seems to be increasing in concentrations in the atmosphere and we don't exactly know why. Is it coming from agriculture? Is it leaking out of fossil fuel infrastructure? Emissions need to be going down and we're going in the wrong direction. Concentrations of methane are higher than all of recorded human history, which has the potential to shoot the climate off into a much, much warmer state. We absolutely know for sure that significant amounts of methane come from agriculture. You have literally a matter of years to avoid dangerous, potentially catastrophic climate change. We need to think about everything that we do in terms of how we're affecting the climate. And food systems and agriculture has certainly got to be on the table of things that we need to address.
One way that farmers can help to do this is by using the Farm Carbon Calculator, a tool developed right here in Cornwall. This lets farmers measure their emissions of greenhouse gases like methane as a starting point to work out what to do about them.
The calculator starts by gathering data about numbers of livestock, crops that are being grown, how much fertiliser is being applied, how much diesel they're putting in their tractors, where their energy is coming from. And all of that is totaled up to provide the farm's greenhouse gas emissions. But then on the other side of the balance, it's then also looking at sequestration, the process of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and holding it in our landscape. How many areas of hedgerows and woodlands they have on the farm, Have they got ponds or meadows? And it's a really, really simple subtraction sum. So it's emissions, take away sequestration, which gives you your carbon footprint. For a lot of farmers, they think that it may well be something that says you're going to tell me I can't keep cows or I can't apply any fertiliser. Whereas in reality, it is that real first vital step to be able to understand what's going on your farm, where those emissions are coming from, and then the exciting bit in terms of actually what can we do about it. And the really good thing to remember is that the things that make sense in terms of reducing emissions also make economic sense. So there's nothing not to like about actions that will reduce your greenhouse gas emissions.
A big part of our farm's footprint comes from something that isn't very nice to talk about. And increasingly, methane doesn't only come from animals burping, because most of Cornwall's livestock emissions actually comes from the way in which manure is managed. Cornwall's cows and sheep produce enough manure each year to fill Penzance's Jubilee Pool, the UK's largest outdoor swimming pool, about 1,100 times. Sheep aren't so much of an issue because, like my Hardy Dexter cows, most of them stay outdoors all year round, where dung beetles quickly break their manure down to naturally fertilise the soil. But most dairy cows in Cornwall are kept indoors over winter, or sometimes all year round. Falling milk prices over recent years forced many farmers to expand their herds to keep their heads above water, and this has caused a growing problem.
One of the key challenges is actually having enough slurry storage. We're talking thousands and thousands of pounds to build a store to hold all of that slurry. Our manure is like liquid gold because it's got a huge amount of nutrient in it.
But what could be an amazing natural fertiliser if kept until spring has increasingly become a problem to get rid of in winter. When the stores are full, farmers have to spread it on their fields, even if they are bare with no plants growing. If the ground is waterlogged, it can run off, polluting rivers with harmful bacteria. And in spring, farmers may then use imported artificial fertilisers to grow the grass and other crops for their cows to eat. These fertilisers have a really huge carbon footprint because they need so much energy to make. And both slurry and artificial fertilisers can emit another greenhouse gas that is even worse than methane.
The gas that nobody really speaks about is nitrous oxide. And nitrous oxide is a big deal when we think about farming emissions because not only is it 298 times more potent in terms of its ability to cause global temperature rise than carbon dioxide is, but 80% of that comes from agriculture. Our fertilisers and our manures can potentially have an environmental risk associated with them if they're not being applied at the right time or if they're being applied at too high an amount. Depending on the weather conditions and how much water and moisture is in the soil, it might be lost as nitrous oxide.
Farmers can help reduce this problem by using special equipment to inject slurry into the soil rather than spraying it up into the air. They can also cover their slurry stores to stop them filling up with rain in winter. This means they don't have so much muck to spread when the plants can't use it. But now there is a much more high-tech solution to at least some of the slurry emissions. Chris Mann worked on the cryogenic systems used to cool satellite sensors measuring the ozone hole back in the 1980s. Today he's using this expertise to liquefy the methane escaping from slurry and turn it into a climate-friendly fuel to replace diesel. When burned, this releases only water and the carbon dioxide that the grass absorbed before the cow ate it.
So this is what your normal slurry looks like. If you look at the surface, you can see the actual methane coming up. You'll see bubbles rise up. It is coming off everywhere. This is a problem that's not unique to Cornwall. It's absolutely everywhere in the UK, everywhere in Europe, everywhere in America. If we capture that and use it, we get a massive benefit.
Through its pilot scheme at 6 council-owned dairy farms, the company has helped to develop a pioneering methane tractor, and this fuel will soon be used to power all the vehicles used to fix the potholes in Cornish roads too.
Cornwall Council has the problem of slurry producing methane. They have the problem of diesel trucks emitting CO2, and what we've done is basically join the dots. That is better than a diesel truck to drive. It's cleaner for the environment, virtually no particulate, and we'll be supplying the gas from all the farms in Cornwall. Everywhere there's a farm, there's no reason why you can't have a small filling station. So it's quite a big leap for farming and haulage and small trucks. This is when it really does become a no-brainer because, you know, we've just taken you from big piles of cow poo, waste manure, all producing harmful gases, and then once it's been processed, it's used for replacing diesel at a profit. If we do it right, then it has the potential to really change the planet. You know, it started in Cornwall.
But so far, the Bennerman system is operating on only a handful of almost 400 dairy farms in Cornwall, and rolling it out widely enough to have a meaningful climate impact will take time. Given the huge environmental risk of methane, is there an argument for stopping livestock-related emissions altogether? Some people are putting their liberty on the line to try to make this happen.
We need to stop tinkering around the edges to make livestock farming less bad. It can't continue if we're going to have a livable planet. In September, hundreds of animal rebellion activists were at dairy processing plants and targeting supermarkets to disrupt the supply of dairy across the UK and draw attention to the climate emergency and animal agriculture's role in that. We, in the past, have tried letters and petitioning to get this really important issue into governmental conversations, but it just hasn't worked. And if you look through history, direct action has been extremely effective. The suffragettes at their time campaigning for the women's vote were extremely unpopular. They tied themselves to railings, they did hunger strikes, they threw themselves in front of horses, and a lot of people were against their tactics, but we now see that it was absolutely necessary. Some people are willing to get arrested in these protests because they have nothing to lose, and a lot of young people are willing to get arrested because they have everything to lose. 20 years down the line, will a criminal record stop me from getting a good job or a mortgage? But then what if those things aren't even possible because the climate crisis is so bad?
I don't agree with animal rebellion, but my heart really goes out to these young people who feel so desperate about their future. And they're right to worry about some aspects of livestock farming. My cows only eat food produced on this farm, but many animals in Cornwall have an invisible carbon footprint that stretches all the way across the world. This stems from tragic events in British farming that led to a ban on farm animals eating a homegrown food source called pap. Sometimes political decisions can have unforeseen environmental consequences.
Hens need protein to be able to produce eggs. There is no getting away from that. It's really trying to find the best way of feeding that protein. PAP stands for processed animal protein. The parts of the process of slaughtering an animal and what is then left afterwards. So blood meal, bone meal, some offal, and put it back into the food chain for animal feed. Because of BSE back in the early 90s, this basically caused the government to rule out using this product.
BSE, or mad cow disease, caused by cows being fed the contaminated remains of other animals, led to nearly 200 human deaths and 4 million cows being destroyed. With pap banned, many parts of the farming industry needed an alternative source of protein-rich food and turned to soya. But growing this crop has often led to huge areas of the Amazon rainforest and other sensitive habitats being destroyed, with major climate implications. While the UK accounts for only a tiny amount of global soya consumption and almost 2/3 of what we import comes from sustainable sources, Rebecca believes it is time for change.
The UK imports between 2.2 to 3.2 million tonnes of soy a year. But we don't need to do that because we have a perfectly good source of protein right here at home. PAP is a beautifully balanced fatty acid profile for an animal to eat. Things have moved on considerably. We've learned a lot from what happened. We shouldn't be frightened of things that have gone wrong in the past. This product at the moment has been incinerated and wasted and put into landfill, and that is just outrageous. If we were able to use processed animal protein, the amount of soya that the industry would import would be seriously less. The EU have made it legal again to use PAP in the food chains. They're pretty strict with what you can put in animal feed. They're happy and confident that it's okay to use again, having improved processes. Yes, it's cheaper to be able to feed that, which is great for them, for the farmer, but it's not so much that being the big deal. The big deal is the saving to the environment, and that's really key.
Whilst I believe it's unethical to feed animal remains to herbivores, is there a case for feeding this to omnivores? With nearly all the world's soya being grown for animal feed, the climate benefits of finding an alternative could be massive. Studies at the Future Farm, a unique research facility in East Cornwall, are looking at how to limit the impact of dairy cows' diets too.
We've got up to 220 cows. We can divide them into groups of up to about 75 cows. We can feed them differently, we can manage them differently. We need a very precise way of formulating and measuring the feeds in an automated feed kitchen. We then need a robot that can precisely distribute the feed to the cow. Each cow has an electronic identification tag on it, so we can record the yield of milk, and then we can analyse the effect on the slurries because we collect the slurries separately. One project we're doing is comparing and contrasting feed that is routinely brought in, and soya comes significant distances from land that was arguably once rainforest or otherwise rich in biodiversity. And we were researching replacing that with products that would otherwise go to waste. When you brew beer, the spent grains from brewing still have a nutritional benefit. When you've got biscuits that in manufacture have become damaged, cows are not nearly so picky. They're not going to dunk it in their tea.
James Dyke agrees that anything to reduce soya is a good thing, but the challenges we face need much bolder action than just improving animal feed.
The government think that the solution to all of humanity's problems is more growth, and we're just going to innovate our way out of impacts. So, for example, we'll change animal feed to such that it produces slightly less methane. We'll come up with ways to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The UK is sometimes held up as one of the world's leading nations on action on climate change. Unfortunately, when you look at the progress the nation is making, it's falling further and further behind. At some point in the next 5 years, something transformative has got to happen.
We clearly do need major action on the climate crisis. The problem is, looking at livestock emissions alone is way too simple and misses an incredibly important point. Pasture-fed animals farmed in natural systems are actually key to building the health of something that is utterly crucial if we're going to have a chance of getting climate change under control.
This teaspoon of soil has more microorganisms in it than there are people on the planet.
Holly gives talks to everybody from Cornish GCSE students and local farmers to African chemical companies about the financial, nutritional and climate benefits of protecting this busy underground world.
There's more carbon in our soil than the atmosphere. Soil is our best hope to take basically carbon out of the air. Plants, through photosynthesis, take that carbon out of the air, put it into their bodies and put excess through their roots. The microbes take those carbohydrates that the roots are feeding down, and those root exudates containing lots of carbon can be stored in the soil for millions of years. Everyone's thinking we've got to capture carbon and put it in our trees. But if you think about it, a tree only lasts about 100, 150 years. But this here soil, it holds that carbon for infinity if it's looked after. So soil is the place to put it. Unfortunately, we haven't been looking after our soils very well. In the last 150 years, we've lost over 50% of our topsoil. If you plough a soil, you lose that structure. If you haven't got a living root in the soil to hold those particles, then it'll just wash away or even blow away. And this stuff is a resource for farmers. It's their bank account. It takes a long time to create this beautiful soil, about 100 years to create just a centimetre, and it can be lost in one flood. Sadly, in Cornwall, every year we lose between 16 and 40,000 tonnes. That's a lot of topsoil.
But what we need to do is get to understand and know our soils more intimately, and that all starts by getting a spade. Just get down on your hands and knees, dig it up and have a look at what's happening. We're looking at the sort of soil structure. What's happening with our plant roots? Look what we found. Look at this. This is one of our deep burrowing worms. These worms are the absolute heroes of underground life. If you're doing a lot of ploughing, those won't be there. Those burrows that they're making also allow water to go down. They allow air into the soil because we want our soil to act a bit like a sponge. We want it to hold the water when it's dry and release it slowly, because there is an impact to soils as to whether we flood. As we get these periods of more extreme heat and extreme wet, if we can improve our soils, then it's a win-win-win-win-win on everything as well as the climate.
Malcolm Barrett doesn't need convincing. He's so passionate about protecting carbon in the soil that he's spent £30,000 on a piece of kit that has dramatically changed how he sows the seeds for the crops to feed his cattle over winter. It all started when he was lent a book about an American farmer bringing his degraded soil back from the brink.
I'll be honest, I don't particularly read books, but that book I actually sat and read from front to back, and yeah, it made me sit up and think, actually, there is other ways of growing crops or doing things on a farm without having to do it the conventional way. This is a Missouri direct drill. On the front of the machine, there's legs that go underneath to loosen the soil, and then at the back here, the plants are planted just beside the slots at the front where it's been loosened. Most conventional drills, you would need a plough to turn the soil over. We don't have to move any soil to plant any seeds in the ground, so we're containing more carbon. We're learning so much about soil health, and this was a quick answer to reduce our carbon footprint. I sort of took the bullet and thought, right, we'll jump right in with both feet. I'm confident we can make it work. It's just convincing other people that it's the way to go. Unfortunately, in the farming community, we're a bit slow in getting going sometimes, and somebody has to be an oddball to make it work, and that's me. We've actually even done some trials of maize this year with it. Normally with maize, you plough, work the soil, put it in a nice fine till of soil. We've gone and direct drilled the maize to compare what would happen on conventional systems. So far, there's a slight difference, but the direct drill isn't too far behind. It's reducing our input costs for growing crops, which is quite vital at the moment with the way the fertiliser and sprays and fuel prices are going.
Malcolm does contract work with the drill for neighbouring farmers to help recoup the costs of buying it. But this is only part of the work he's been doing to reduce his farm's carbon footprint.
Since we've started this journey of planting trees, scrub, ponds, I'm getting more excited about it all the time. The wildlife that we're now encouraging, I also hope will bring in more insects that will help eat some of the bugs and diseases that come within our crops, rather than me having to use mechanical or bought-in products to do it.
The UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, and this is largely due to the agricultural practices promoted by farming policies since World War II. So it's great to see farmers like Malcolm showing that we can restore biodiversity while still producing food. My cows don't only provide me with beef to sell, they are also a key part of my work to restore nature and create habitat for wildlife. They mimic the effects of the large herbivores that grazed this land in prehistoric times, creating the mosaic of wetland, woodland and rough moorland habitats we see here today. Tim Williams is also using cows as ecosystem engineers on one of Cornwall's 3 net zero farms, which until he arrived was intensively growing potatoes and daffodils. He's currently in year 2 of a lottery-funded challenge to prove his farm can become carbon neutral within 5 years.
The general large scale, it's just all about production, yield, and you cannot continue to do that. I mean, we've probably got about 10 years on that before the whole system collapses. The first winter I was here, the loss of soil was huge. It's a huge issue. When you see orange water flowing out of fields, that's soil. That's like thousands and thousands and thousands of years worth of work flowing out over a winter. Working with the Farm Net Zero project, basically what they're doing is they're monitoring the increases in soil organic matter. So how much carbon can I take out of this system so that it's actually locked down in the soil. If we can build our soils by 0.1% over the next 5 years, we're already neutral. It's really, really simple.
Tim has 3 tricks up his sleeve to achieve this. The first involves making use of all the waste organic matter on the farm.
What we do is we create a very highly managed composting system and also blend the seeds with the compost so that when the seed hits the ground, it's got friends that will help it kickstart its life, basically. I've got a super diverse herbal ley. A herbal ley is what you see here for grazing animals on. I've created a blend of plants, brassicas for overwintering, grasses, deep-rooted plants. Clover is a really important way of feeding nitrogen into the system for free. It's photosynthesizing, so it's pumping carbon into the ground, so it's taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and it's building soil organic matter.
And it's not just what they're eating that's different. The animals that graze Tim's herbal lays move across the land quickly in a system called mob grazing, unlike most cows in Cornwall, which may spend several weeks in the same field.
The way that they work in nature is in big groups. They are constantly on the move because there's a predator pressure, so there'd be something chasing them. What we do is we use electric fencing to manage where we want the animals to be at certain times, so that they're kind of mimicking that idea of that continual movement around the farms. So they're just basically in a big group, all together, hanging out, and they move all together as a mob. And the idea there is that they have the most impact on the soil for soil health. They're not continually grazing. So the plant's healthy, the animals are healthy, and it keeps that system ticking over. I move them 3 times a day, and they trample and they defecate, and they add that biology to the system. Cattle, soil, grass have all evolved together. You can't take one out of that system for it to work.
Ironically, while more and more people are opting for a plant-based diet, conventional vegetable farming often involves soil-destroying ploughing, artificial fertilisers and chemicals. I agree with Tim that if we're serious about restoring our soils to tackle climate change, we need to see a return to the more diverse farming techniques of the past, using animals as part of the rotation.
If you're continually hammering the ground year after year, potatoes, cereals, daffodils, cereals, potatoes, cereals, you're always going to be going backwards. So it's about understanding the damage that you're doing and sort of mitigating that damage. Adding animals into this farm has actually brought the farm back to life.
This is where the picture gets complicated, because while regeneratively farmed, pasture-fed animals like Tim's have a positive impact on the soil and therefore the climate, much of the meat on our supermarket shelves may have been farmed very differently.
Something like 1 billion chickens get slaughtered in the UK each year. And you've got pig farms in China which are now multi-level. You've got elevators between them. You can see the effluent ponds from hog farms in the United States from space. And the UK is not immune to these kind of impacts. Many of our rivers over recent years have seen terrific amounts of pollution, largely from farms. And these aquatic ecosystems are barely holding on by their fingernails as it is. The concerns that we've got with agriculture is just the sheer number of cattle that we have now on planet Earth. There are millions and millions of these animals, whereas previously their wild populations would have been just a small fraction. Some people argue that eating meat is natural. We've got canines, and that's true, but pre-agriculture, no humans consumed anything like the amount of meat that we typically do in Western diets. At the moment, meat in general and dairy in general is much too cheap. And one of the reasons it's too cheap is because the cost of these goods doesn't include their environmental impacts. Of course, we all pick up the bill, or our children will, because they're going to be living under the effects of climate change. People just don't really connect the dots. So they see a BLT sandwich or their chicken sandwich, and there's a vague notion of what goes on in producing the meat. And I think for most people that vague notion is, little cows running around in the field and happy pigs. And in some farming systems, that's absolutely true. But these are the exceptions and not the rule. Governments are very wary of giving any kind of indication to people as to regards to what kind of food they eat. So they need to get over this timidity and actually be much more forceful in incentivising people to reduce their meat and dairy.
But reducing meat and dairy farming could spell major changes to the landscape and communities in a place like Cornwall. Alongside their headline-grabbing disruptive actions, the animal rebellion protesters have also been trying to talk to farmers about their vision for the future.
We prepared ourselves for the worst, entering these communities thinking that people would be really hostile and aggressive towards us. A lot of them were not happy, but it created the space where we could listen to each other rather than argue. We tried to express how this disruption was not just disruption for the sake of causing inconvenience. We see it as the only way to draw attention to the massive urgency and the potential for food system reform in this country. If we were to transition to a plant-based food system, we could rewild this land and draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Farmers are pillars of society, they nourish entire nations, and that's why we have these demands for the government to support farmers in a transition to a more sustainable livelihood and way of producing food.
If you travel across the United Kingdom, you'll see monuments to previous histories, whether it's tin mines in the West Country or coastal fishing communities that no longer really exist. There are many industries that we're going to have to sunset. There are many ways in which we're generating goods and services that we just can't do anymore. The question then is, what do we do with these people? What do we do with these communities? What do we do with the skills, experience they've got? And how can we use those skills and experience in order to build a much safer world?
I think we will need to reconsider how much and how intensively we rear livestock and how much meat-based or livestock-based produce we consume. But to say we can just get rid of livestock and it will have a beneficial effect, I think is as ill-informed as somebody turning around and saying there's nothing really we need to worry about. I think the risk of knee-jerk reactions, you end up in an uncontrolled chaos. If we can better manage livestock diet, if we can better appreciate what causes emissions, we will be much better at controlling our future rather than just entering into the great unknown.
What's certainly true is that many farms have become increasingly specialised over my lifetime, and I think farmers are now realising how vulnerable this makes them. My farm is a successful business, and that is due to some very deliberate decisions. My costs are low because I don't need expensive equipment, chemicals, or anything from beyond my local environment. Farming for nature and the climate feels really good. It feels really positive, but it's also about future-proofing. One of the things I've done is to plant 40,000 trees. This has been great for creating shelter, habitat, and extra forage for my cows. This also means that we're self-sufficient in firewood and fruit, and we have material for building and fencing. With the challenges coming due to climate crisis, there's increasing agreement, even amongst large farms, that not all the solutions can be high-tech.
Critically, we need to become more technically efficient in farming if we're going to survive. And it's not just going to be by buying new bits of kit. It should also be by using the knowledge that we might have forgotten. So, from mixed farming systems, how we used to be nutrient independent on farms because we used our own manures and slurries, how we used rotational forms of cropping, all common sense learned over centuries. Over 80 odd years, we've been persuaded to do things which would seem astoundingly stupid now, like get rid of hedgerows, because it makes our land area larger. Huge amounts of fertilizers and pesticides, things like that were pressure that farmers were put under, encouraged by government to try and produce as much as possible. Farmers can feel really quite berated when they read the press. And I do think it is worthwhile remembering that one of the best ways of avoiding blame is to find somebody else to blame. We need food, healthy, nutritious food at an affordable price. Farmers will be proud to feel that they are providing that and helping save the environment and address the climate crisis as well. We've just got to give them the opportunity and the recognition when they do it. I am an optimist. I do think that as a society, so long as we can not fight about it, that we could make a significant difference. I just think that we're going to need an awful lot more incentive and support from government and bigger industries to help us achieve this.
I don't think we should insist that everybody moves to a 100% plant-based diet. There is a role for meat consumption, there's a role for dairy. What we can't have happen is the sustainable meat and dairy being essentially too expensive for most people to afford. There could certainly be a much, much more important role for the government to play in ensuring that the meat and dairy that we get produced is done in the most effective and sustainable way possible. And given that it is so heavily subsidised, there is tremendous power that the government has already got because it can make decisions on how it uses those subsidies.
We all rely on farmers 3 times a day, but we are beginning to see just how damaging some farming systems have become. Yes, change is needed, but this shouldn't just be down to farmers. All of us as consumers can help to bring about that change through the choices we make. By buying less but better meat and dairy, we could support local regenerative farmers as well as the environment. One thing for certain is that with farms covering 75% of our land area in Cornwall, the way they are managed will be absolutely key in the fight against climate change. Some amazing things are already starting to happen in Cornwall, and I hope this is going to get even more of our farmers excited about how they can produce high-quality food while also helping to heal the planet.
No fear or no surprise, there is no way you can deny. Too many holes too big to mend, I've got no time left for you, my friend. Stone hearts chipped away, a little more every day. It's common ground and nothing can grow. Where there's no life, there is no soul. I don't believe we even left the start, and I won't be your fallen star. I've taken my love, I've taken my heart. I won't feel what I felt before. Don't you knock on my door.